Jordan. Welcome to HTO Football. How are you? Are you well?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Pleased that you've decided to have me on. And I know we've been waiting a while to do this, so I'm looking forward to it.
I think so are we. Yeah, and it's a nice time to do it on the eve of the football season as well. So a bit of something different for the listeners, but equally, hopefully, something to complement their feast of football as the season kicks back off, which will be good.
Yeah. So just a bit of background for our listeners. Obviously, we set Jordan the tough assignment at HTO of choosing his best South American 11 of all time. But the one rule was they were never allowed to step foot on European shores during their career. So how did it go?
Yeah, it was good fun. But when you first asked me to put it together, I thought it was going to be relatively easy. And then when you added the time restriction, it became considerably harder for post-2000. The amount of world-class South American players before then, like I could have had a team of World Cup winners because players from South America, there wasn't a necessity in terms of like the money in the game to go to Europe beforehand. And obviously that gulf just got bigger. So yeah, it became a lot harder with that restriction. And it's what made it more enjoyable towards the end, because I'd find a player who I was certain would be in the 11 just to find out he had like one season in Europe or just a rogue handful of games.
Yeah.
To clarify, as Jordan, I was going to say, to clarify, as Jordan just said, the time restriction was post the year 2000, as opposed to a time restriction we placed on Jordan to do it in like 10 minutes or 20 minutes, which would have been a bit unfair, I think.
Yeah, I'd say all time as in like Jordan's lifetime.
Yeah.
So, would you go for a specific formation, or did that chip on change as well?
So that changed with the availability of the players. I always like a 4-3-3. That's sort of what we ended up with. But as you'll see, there was a last minute amendment. But fortunately, the player that I've managed to squeeze in at the last minute is a flexible player anyway. So we've stuck to a 4-3-3.
You always need them in your squad, don't you?
Yes, he very much is.
Yeah, cool. So starting off in goal, then who have you gone for, Jordan?
So that was probably the easiest choice in terms of coming up with the players that I could narrow down from. And it came down to two Brazilians as well. One with 131 goals, despite being a goalie, the most in history. And the other one was a one-man club goalie his whole career, both in the World Cup winning squad for 2002. I went with Rodrigo Ceni. Instead of Marcos. Marcos was the first choice goalie throughout that tournament. But Ceni with the goals as well, the longevity of his career. He was very unlucky not to be classed as a one-man club player as well. He made his debut at 17 for his first club, and then shortly after went to Sao Paulo, which he was there for then 25 years. But yeah, Ceni's individual records as well, I think more than make up for the fact he wasn't the starting goalie in 2002. Over 1,200 appearances over his career. He won the league 3 times, the Copa Libertadores, the Copa Sudamericana, the FIFA World Club Cup trophy. And most, I think, remarkably for a goalkeeper, even won the Player of the Season 3 times. It's fairly rare that a goalkeeper wins the Player of the Season. To do it 3 times and be in the Team of the Season 6 times, I thought was the standout, got him there ahead of Marcos.
Long gone are the days of they're a dying breed, aren't they? Those one-man club.
Yeah, massively. There are more in South America, but fewer and fewer. Especially, I think there's currently 2,000 players out of contract in Argentina alone because of COVID. It's put a lot of players in South America out of work or out of pocket. Obviously, Venezuela's my speciality for background, and you've got the vast majority of the top division players unpaid for 6 months or more. So that's going to shake up a lot of things.
I think I had Marcos in my World Cup 02 dream team
Nice.
when we were at school, Tom. I think I had him in my goal.
I think a lot of
Palmeiras,
people,
Jordan.
And interestingly, the season after the World Cup, they got relegated. They were in Serie B for 2003. They came straight back up, but yeah, he stayed with them.
All right. Do you think is something you've observed with South American football? Is obviously your thing, Venezuela particularly? But like this day and age, goalies play out from the back. They're almost like midfielders, aren't they, with the ball at their feet? Is that something that has been something that in South American football has been going on for a few years and we've just not noticed it? Or do you think is it a continental thing? Or do you think that goalies used to always hit it long and it's now changing?
To go with Brazil, just where we've spoken about Senna and Marcos, and now we've got in the Premier League Alisson and Edison, who both very much like typify that style. It's a recent. It could seem shocking in recent times because Brazil had this long bad relationship with their goalkeepers that went back to losing to Uruguay in the World Cup in, I think it was the 50s, and there was a big distrust for goalies doing anything other than just the bog standard. And there was like racial undertones to it as well. Like there wasn't a non-white goalkeeper that represented Brazil between like the 50s and then Dida just after that World Cup 2002. So there was Brazil in particular, there was like a lot of distrust for goalkeepers trying to be eccentric. But like a lot of people do think of South American goalies as eccentric, like taking free kicks, taking penalties, Renny Higuita doing all sorts, dribbling up the pitch. I don't know, to be honest, if it's a characteristic common in South America. And
then defensively, have you gone for a 3?
I've gone for a back 4. Yeah, the left and right backs, both Boca Juniors, current Boca Juniors players as well. Right back went for Buffarini. I first became aware of him when he was at San Lorenzo about 7 or 8 years ago. This was a really hard position to pick for. Again, the frequency of great right backs from South America in the past decade or so, either moving to Europe for like long successful careers or just cheeky sojourn made it very difficult. Buffarini is very quick right back when he was younger. He's 32 now, so his chance of going to Europe is almost minimal. And he really got stuck behind Pablo Zabaleta on the international stage as well. Ever present for Argentina for so long, very steady. So Buffarini, although he was called up a few times, never actually made his debut. I think he could have played in Europe through an Italian passport, but it just didn't come. Nevertheless, his career in South America was quality. He won the Libertadores with San Lorenzo and has won the league a few times with Boca Juniors since moving to them in 2017. Left back, again, Boca Juniors, Frank Fabra, Colombian. He was really unlucky with his international career. By the time he became the number 1 instead of Pablo Armero, who Premier League fans might know for his short spell at West Ham. He then got injured. He did his ACL just before the World Cup 2018. And that really probably would have been his chance for a move to Europe. He was about 27 at the time. And yeah, he was definitely the first choice for Russia right up until about 20 days before the World Cup when he did his ACL.
Okay. Centre backs, obviously, one of them looks familiar, but I've never heard of the other one. Both Brazilians, yeah.
Yes.
I like the fact that there's a real multi.
Yeah, so diverse, isn't there?
Yeah.
So many different nationalities in
immediately you think, don't you? If your knowledge isn't like, obviously we know a fair few South American players, like the obvious ones, but you tend to think of Argentina and Brazil, don't you? Really, as your armchair fan would go for those sorts of clubs, and then the odd Uruguayan or
yeah.
Very much so. And I think had we not made it post 2000, it would have been a very Brazil-Argentina heavy squad with, like you say, a few Uruguayans. The post 2000 definitely shook it up a bit. In the end, with the last minute change as well, it was only Chile, Ecuador and Paraguay that I left unrepresented. And that seems like particularly harsh on, say, Chile, for example, but their best players end up in Europe. So it was difficult.
Okay.
So yeah, the centre backs was our second and third Brazilian. Dede was the first one that I picked up. He came very close, supposedly, to coming to Europe in 2013. He was linked with Manchester United and Liverpool, as well as Benfica, but nothing ever materialised, and that was his one chance. He wouldn't have known it at the time, but that was his one chance because then injuries plagued his career. For the next 3 or 4 seasons. He was only 24 at the time and had his whole career ahead of him and was very much considered one of Brazil's best centre-backs. But then at the beginning of 2015, he had surgery on his knee that kept him out for the entire year. And then a few weeks after returning, he fractured his kneecap, which put him back out again. So sort of between the end of 2014 and the beginning of 2018, he barely played any football at all. 4 years for a centre-back. Well, 4 years for any player is an incredibly long time. But for him to then come back in and go straight back into the starting lineup is obviously testament to the quality that he does have, because that's exactly what happened. He's gone straight back into their lineup and has been there for the past 2 years now. But yeah, like his chance for Europe is gone now. He's 30, 31 years old. Is highly unlikely. But like a quality player that very much missed what ended up being his one chance, and then injury ravaged him.
Mm. And then I can't pronounce this guy's Rodrigo Chow.
I'm going to go with Chow. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, let's not worry about butchering it.
If we say it with confidence, the chances are 99% of the people not listening also can't pronounce it, or maybe not even heard of the player. So if we all say it with confidence, I think we'll run with it.
And the one guy that knows how to pronounce it will definitely comment.
Yeah, exactly, absolutely right. So write a review on the podcast somewhere, on Apple, like, I enjoyed the content. Clearly, however, just like, however, yeah.
Can you hide comments on YouTube? You might
yeah. On Twitter now, you can choose who can reply. Just turn it off. So yeah, unfortunately, this centre back is another one that injuries could potentially be the reason why. But for him, he's still younger, so the chance to Europe is still there. And Rodrigo Chow, like I said, he's 27 years old, so very much not over, especially for a centre-back. Again, he came very, very close, even closer than Dede. He signed a 5-year deal with Valencia in 2015, but failed 2 medicals. And this came a year after, likewise, damaging his ACL. And spending 6 months out of the game. So, he was good. He was evidently good enough for Europe, a 5-year deal with Valencia, and only missed out on it probably because of that ACL injury causing him to fail the medicals. But he's done really well. He joined Flamengo in 2019. I'm not going to talk about Flamengo with another player coming up, but he was a key part of that all-conquering squad last year that hopefully some of the listeners saw, thanks to the BBC showing the Copa Libertadores final. But yeah, that 2019 Flamengo side, incredibly talented. There are a few players in there that I would have put in had it not been for like short loan spells in Europe, Gabriel Barbosa being a main one. But yeah, he was great last year, named in the team of the year in the nationwide league as well as the state league. Some people may not know, in like Brazil, obviously a huge country, they have their standard like Premier League equivalent, but they also have smaller state leagues.
Yeah.
And he was in the team of the season for both last year, as Flamengo won both.
So just a little detour, Jordan. You mentioned like injuries there to a couple of players, centre backs in particular. Do you cite that as usually the main reason as to why a player never leaves South America to, you could argue, join the big time in Europe?
I think it's injuries and then also perception. And I had this sort of confirmed to me when I was researching for the book, when I was out in Venezuela speaking to like a few of their former national team managers, Richard Paez, who was their manager from 2001 to 2007, and Noel San Vicente, who was their manager in 2015-16. And for Venezuela and a few other countries, Peru in particular, based on the talent that they have, the perception of South American footballers is Brazilian and Argentinians are the best. And so that's where people go. That's what they've got as a reference point. So that's where they look again. There's a really good book called Soccernomics by Szymanski and Cooper. And they talk about this confirmation bias a lot. And there's definitely players in South America that are technically good enough to play in Europe, like without a doubt. Last year, I interviewed the senior data editor of Pro Evolution Soccer, the video game, and their scouting network is absolutely huge and very professional. And he was saying that there's players in like the third tier of Brazilian football that are good enough technically to play in the Premier League, but what they lack is like the game intelligence. So that's like another big reason that players in South America can be held back from getting a move to Europe.
Well, Gabriel Martinelli springs to mind as soon as you said that. coming from a team in Brazil. Is it Ituano, wasn't it? I can't remember how you say
I'm
it.
I'm not sure what team he came from.
I can't remember what league they were in, Tom. They I'm sure they were like third or fourth tier.
Yeah.
Third. And he's obviously come over, and not, I wouldn't say a superstar, but he looks like one in the making, doesn't he? So yeah, it's interesting you say that.
And it's good that they picked him up at 17, because there's still time for like any game intelligence he doesn't have can still be coached. And that was another prevailing thing that I picked up in Venezuela. Like I had players that had long international careers, starting in like the 90s, and they were telling me like they didn't learn how to properly trap a ball until they were already like 25. Like knowing to take that first touch out of your foot to the left or right when you receive a pass is like a skill that nobody ever taught them when they were younger. So they could be like great at dribbling, great at passing, but those small bits of technique that they just didn't pick up when they were young really hinders alongside game intelligence. So yeah, I think I'd probably like highlight three reasons that hold some South American players back, and that would be like injuries, perception, and game intelligence. But you think a lot of the players that we do see that are like quality, and you noticed it with I keep going back to Brazilians, but you've noticed it with Brazilians in the past 20 years, the amount that come over young, but then they're burned out by like 28, like Ronaldinho, like Robinho, Kaka got that really bad injury.
Adriano.
But exactly. And like these players are burning out young because they started young as well. Like, they're already leading their teams. Neymar, again, like wouldn't be surprising if he's burnt out in a couple of years. Like they're already leading their teams when they're like 17, 18. And the football season in Brazil, like we think we've got a relentless calendar here, but like football in Brazil is like non-stop because you've got the nationwide leagues and then you've got the state leagues and there's state cups and there's nationwide cups and there's absolutely loads. So they're playing like 60 game seasons plus from the age of like 17, 18. So even if they like move to Europe at 22, 23, they've already got like close to 300, 350 games.
You've often, you've used the phrase "miss their chance" or "that was their chance," and I guess for the vast majority of these players, that is kind of like the pot at the end of the rainbow is potentially to get a big money move to Europe. But is there any top talented players, do you think, and not to put you on the spot to bring names, but do you think it still happens where actually they're also just happy to stay in South America? So if you've done this league, so like we said, if you've done this list of a all-time and you're picking out players from the 50s, 60s, 70s, there would be a lot of top names there who went on and won the World Cup, who probably had offers to go and play in Europe or elsewhere, but actually just wanted to stay in South America and actually just stayed there because that's obviously traveling wasn't as much done, let alone going to work in another country. So that's part of the reason. But are there still gems that you think exist that are actually just quite happy not even to contemplate a European adventure, or is it just the pot of the rainbow for all of them?
I think there are players that are comfortable to just have their career in their country, wherever they're from. The one that immediately springs to mind is Edmundo, in the obviously in the 90s, a Brazilian striker, but he did have his spell at Fiorentina. But he said in an interview fairly recently with 442 that he had when he was at Palmeiras, he had the option to sign for Real Madrid, but the money was no better. And he said, like, what was the point? I was happy in Brazil and they're going to pay me the same. Not everyone believes that he was offered that contract. And he said it was something crazy, like a 9-year deal. But yeah, his reason was they weren't going to pay me any better. So what's the point? And I think like historically, there was that aspect. Like Europe hasn't always been pumped full of money. So the pool wasn't always there. And then we see a lot of South American players come over young and they don't adjust because it's such a culture shock. The Joe that ended up at Everton, he went to Russia at a young age, developed a drinking problem because he couldn't speak Russian, spent all his time in the hotel drinking because he just fell into this depression. So like a lot of players, it's a massive culture shock.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the sort of story of Adriano, isn't it? The Inter Milan striker, that always comes to mind because I always search him every now and then, see what's going on with Adriano.
Yeah.
You got to. But you mentioned Edmundo there. Your team, if you had him in your team wouldn't have 11 men on the pitch at the end, would they?
No. I do like him though. He's a character.
Yeah, very much so. So going on to midfield then. So you've got 3 in there and you've got you're playing a cam, yeah?
Yes. So I'll start with him, as you've highlighted him. And he was like, I think he was probably, other than the goalkeeper, just because the goalkeeper was so obvious, I think the Cam was the first player that sprung to mind. And that's Di Arrascaeta, who's currently playing with Flamengo, Uruguayan. He's 26 years old, 25 international caps, including the 2018 World Cup. And he was in the Copa America squad last year as well. His past 12 months, past 18 months since he joined Flamengo has been tremendous. He's played just over 30 goals and has just over 30 goal contributions. Like, a game doesn't pass without him either scoring or assisting. And it's very well balanced as well, 16 goals and 15 assists. He was linked to Inter in 2019. This window, he's been linked with Wolves, Celtic, and Newcastle before Newcastle's takeover and fell apart. But yeah, like last season with Flamengo, he was already a very good player, had already proven himself, but last season was just crazily successful. I was saying about Brazil having competition after competition, and last year they won 6 trophies, the Copa Libertadores being the big one, but they also won the Brazilian League and Cup double. He got a place in the team of the season for both. So there's a really good article about him actually on Total Football Analysis for people that are more like match analysis and tactically inclined. He offers so much. He creates a lot of space off the ball, and when he's on the ball, he's very quick in making his decisions, which has led to a lot of like assists from just outside the box. Like, there's not big build-up play in his game often. He very much links the play in the final third with devastating speed. Speed of thought rather than speed of pace.
That's a position that I can think of some really classic cams down the years from the South American sides. You know, you've got players like Aymar, Ortega comes to mind, Riquelme, obviously. Like, I can talk forever about Riquelme. But yeah, so it's a position, isn't it? That's that sort of number 10 role in the hole that South American players. There's a long list of greats, really.
Yeah, I think Messi said Pablo Aymar was like his idol growing up, one of his idols. I love Riquelme as well, and like he's just so cult, isn't he? But like his almost like lackadaisical way of playing is just incredible.
Yeah, definitely. And then so you got two. You playing 2 DMs, or is there like a more of an 8 and a 6, or?
Well, if I was managing them, I'd have one anchor man and one shuttling up
one
and
bombing
down.
on.
By the way, Jordan, part of this whole deal was that you were obviously to create your own side and you'd play them. So
yeah. I now need to go and recruit them all. Yeah. The anchor man. This was another hard one because everyone likes the players that stick in the mind, and it's the less flashier players that do like a great job and hold teams together, that don't really get the attention. So they're the ones that I had to like really rack my brain for. But I'm happy with my selection for this position. I ran it past Simon Edwards, who's a South American football expert in Colombia. He thought it was a solid choice. I'm happy with that. And that's Alexander Mecca from Colombia. He's 32 years old, so sort of had strong competition in Freddy Guarin, who a lot of people probably know of. Yep. Football manager, legend, FIFA legend, real life, very successful, but didn't win everything going like he would have for most people on Football Manager. His career was a little bit sort of had to live a little bit in the shadow of Freddy Guarin. A lot of people know him from like Football Manager and FIFA, like win you everything if you sign him kind of thing. Real life, good career, still made it to Europe, but wasn't absolutely outstanding like a lot of people were thinking it would be. And then under Mecca in terms of age is Wilmer Barrios, who would have been in this team if we picked it last year, but he's been at Zenit St. Petersburg for the past year. Quality player. It's very rare that like a defensive midfielder is going to stick in your head as like the best player or one of the best players in a league, but Wilmer Barrios is definitely that. So Mecca has been stuck in between. And 2014 was probably like his opportunity to get the move to Europe that potentially he deserved. And that would have been with Colombia at the 2014 World Cup, a competition that a lot of people remember Colombia doing well at. 2010 probably more so, but 2014 again was a very good World Cup for Colombia. He played in 4 of their 5 games, started in 1 of them. And at the time he was 26. So it was like a ripe age for a player of his position to make a big step up. At the time he was still in Colombia, where he played his best years of football. And with Atletico Nacional, they won the Copa Libertadores in 2016. And a lot of that could be put down to the disciplined role that he played in the midfield, holding everything together, intercepting and breaking up play. He's a player that Copa Libertadores is where I see most of the South American football that I do watch. And yeah, he was a very good player there. He's since been in Mexico with Monterrey and León, and now he's in Paraguay with Libertad. So his career has not gone downhill, but wasn't at the heights it was in 2014, where perhaps 2014-15, where perhaps he could have moved to Europe.
Alongside him, you've got your sole Peruvian. Yes,
my sole Peruvian that I was happy about, and happy to have another one club man. Jose Luis Carranza, and he was a bit. It was unlucky that Peru at the time weren't being looked at. There's a lot of players that started their careers, Peruvians that started their careers, finished their careers at the same kind of time, and there was only a few that ever got the opportunity to play in Europe. Jose del Solar, who played in Spain for a few years. And Percy Olivares, who also played in Spain. But the one that everyone in England will know is obviously Nobby Solano, who's at Newcastle and West Ham. But yeah, even Peru's even Peru's record cap holder, Roberto Palacios, had a 20-year career in the national team and never played in Europe. So yeah, going back to what we were talking about earlier with holding players back, like I think very much Peru is perhaps an example. Not as severe as Venezuela or Bolivia, but an example of where perception has held back their players. Since then, they were probably the last generation to suffer, because since then you've had like Paulo Guerrero in Germany, Claudio Pizarro, again with Bayern Munich and then Chelsea, and Jefferson Farfan as well. Like the latest Peruvian generation have had them to look up to, all having had successful careers in Europe. But yeah, Carranza himself, over 600 appearances for the same club, over 50 caps for the national team, played in 10 Copa Libertadores. But as far as I'm aware, never even came close to playing in Europe. It's fair to say his best years were pre-2000. His career started in 1985, but he was still going in 2004, and he won a league title in 2000. So I think that qualifies him.
We'll let you have that one.
Got the medal to back it up. So
he's still winning titles.
Get to the front three. That's where all the fun starts. All the goals.
Yeah, it's also where I got screwed up late in the day. So until about 2 hours ago, I'd reserved the slot for Everton of Gremio.
Of course.
He's been linked with Arsenal in the past year or so. He was probably Brazil's best player at the Copa America last year. Very much unsung, because you've got Neymar always getting the credit, and obviously Gabriel Jesus as well up front. But yeah, Everton was a very, very tidy player. It was only a matter of time before he went to Europe. Unfortunately, that time came before this podcast. But it did make way for a Bolivian player. And I'm not afraid to admit, I had to pull on a friend to help me with this one, because I was just screwed up so late in the day. But it's Chumacero. He's 29 years old. Very versatile player across the midfield and front three. Bolivia's best player by far. He spent 10 years at the Bolivian club called The Strongest, who I imagine a lot of people have heard of purely for being called The Strongest. But for the past 2 years, he's been in Mexico with Puebla. This was a very late addition. But yeah, he's been Bolivia's best player for a best part of a decade now, without ever getting a look to move to Europe. So I was happy to include him for the diversity. And then on the other wing, a player that I feel very passionately about, a player that I was, I didn't even have to think about. I knew he'd be in this 11. And that's Jefferson Soteldo of Venezuela. He's a player really responsible for me taking an interest in Venezuelan football in the first place.
Oh, wow.
It was 2017 at the Under-20s World Cup. Hopefully England fans will either, if not remember, know that England won the World Cup that year. And Venezuela were the runners-up. I just remember seeing this tiny creative midfielder playing with all like the nonchalance of Ronaldinho, just played because he loves playing. Ronaldinho was, I'm a Southampton fan, so the player that made me like fall in love with football was James Beattie. I'm slightly too young to remember Matt Letiz at his best, but the person that made me fall in love with like the beauty of the game was like Ronaldinho. And Soteldo is like the player that comes closest to matching for me Ronaldinho, for just his sheer artistry and like playing football because he enjoys it. Like we now have like Ronaldo and Messi and the debate over who's better out of those two. But for me, like nobody will ever come close to Ronaldinho.
Yeah, it's a weird one. It is a weird one, that one, isn't it? Because we spoke to Jonathan Johnson on our pod a few weeks back. He's a French football expert and he covers PSG closely. And he said the same about Ronaldinho, that everything he did on a football pitch was out of pure joy. And and maybe obviously Ronaldinho and Messi, don't get me wrong, obviously they enjoy what they do, but they're probably a lot more obsessed with their stats and what they produce at the end of it, aren't they? Whereas Ronaldinho, it's more off the cuff in the moment. Yeah,
absolutely. Like for me, like the Messi Ronaldo debate is there whether we like it or not, and I think everyone's got an opinion on it. For me, it's Messi, just because I think obviously like Ronaldo's quality, but like for me Ronaldo is an elite athlete that happens to play football and is very good at it.
Yeah, we don't think it's a debate on this show.
Yeah, really. We don't think it's a close debate, to be fair, and we're glad to hear that. No, we're glad to hear that such a renowned and specialist voice like yourself agrees with the right answer, which is that it's not a debate and that Messi's a far superior talent on the football pitch.
Yeah, that is how I very much feel. Like I'm not going to say Ronaldo is not an absolutely incredible.
Oh, he's a
player.
fantastic footballer. I'm being facetious, but like it's just for me, it's not. I always say when people say who's better, because for me, and I know Andrew's said this a lot of times, but I think there's a different debate between who's the greatest at something and who's the best. And I think at the best, I don't think there can be a debate. Like if you give them the ball for 10 minutes and just watch them, I think you know who's better. You just know who's better with the ball and who's more natural. Ultimately greatness is about achievements and about lifting other people up and inspirational moments. And that can be a different debate. And I think Ronaldo's far outstripped, I think, what anyone thought his talent level would take him to. And that is full credit to the man. He's phenomenal.
Yeah.
But in terms of better, I just don't think I don't think it's close.
I agree.
And I think you're similar. I think you're right. Someone like Ronaldinho, for me, is a far greater talent, far better than Ronaldo. It doesn't mean he's greater.
I was just about to say, I think technically, if you go through that Ballon d'Or list, for example, over the last 20 years, I think I could probably say 3 or 4 that I think technically, if you give them the ball for half, and like Zinedine Zidane for me is a better footballer than Ronaldo ever has been.
Yeah. It doesn't mean they're greater. It means that means they're better.
Yeah, Ronaldo's what Ronaldo's done is he's made it a debate out of pure addiction to his craft.
Yeah. That Ronaldinho goal, like for example, the one at Chelsea, the one at the bridge with the toe poke, like that's something out of nothing. That genius. That is just genius, and that's just that's what we love to see on the football
against
pitch.
Leverkusen in the final. Yeah. Plucking it out from the sky here. I don't get me wrong, Ronaldo. Obviously, we could put a compilation together, couldn't we, of some unbelievable goals that he scored. It's not. I just think that technically, it's a different sort of debate for me. I think there's a few players I could think of. I think that are better technically, but
so you can see we're passionate about it, Jordan.
I completely agree. I think a lot of Ronaldo's artistry came when he was still in the Premier League, and he left in 2009, I think. And to so when you think of a lot of the innovative or creative or spur of the moment stuff that we love in Ronaldinho or Messi, more so Ronaldinho by a mile, but Ronaldo hasn't produced that for years. He became obsessed with being an elite athlete, which he is, and a goal scorer, which he is. But I'd every day rather watch Messi.
Yeah.
So this is how Soteldo came to be in my squad, through basically being a great imitation of Ronaldinho. And it's really nice to now see Soteldo at Santos as their number 10. The past 12 months has really allowed him to fulfill that promise that he showed at the Under-20 World Cup 3 years ago, because it didn't pay dividends immediately. A lot of that squad got moves to Europe fairly soon after, or definitely moves out of Venezuela. And Soteldo sort of stalled a bit in Chile before going to Santos, and then he really benefited with Jorge Sampaoli being the manager at Santos. A lot of I guess English listeners will know him from managing at World Cups But yeah, he did really well under him at Santos, and now I think he's definitely going to be a crucial part of Venezuela's hopes of qualifying for Qatar in 2022. And I definitely think he'll end up in Europe. He's only 23 years old. Spurs supposedly had the option to buy him after that World Cup in 2017. I think 60 million is what they wanted for him, and Daniel Levy didn't want to pay it. And yeah, this year Soteldo said his dream to play for Manchester United. I don't know if he's a Manchester United player. I'd hope he's going to be good enough because he's only got better in the past 12 months.
Okay. And then we're finishing up with striker up front. I mean, I did a little bit of research on this guy. Looks like he scored a few goals in his time. Yeah,
Juan Garcia. And I'm going to openly admit that I've got a bit of Venezuelan bias in this team, but I kept it to 2. And I think there's an argument for this guy. He scored 320 goals in his career. He's a record goal scorer for Venezuela. And he had options and offers to play in Europe. So, that's confirmation that he had the talent. And it's unfortunate that he qualifies for this 11 because those moves never fulfilled. The closest he got for Europe was offers to France. When I spoke to him a few weeks back for an interview that I did for World Football Index, he said that one time he was literally sat on the plane when the move fell through. He said that it was never a lack of willingness on his behalf. He wouldn't explicitly say why these moves fell through, but from talking to other people, not about Juan Garcia, but from talking to other Venezuelans about reasons not to have played in Europe, one thing that massively came up for players that had the opportunity was that they were completely undervalued, be it in the wages that they were given or offered, or the way that they were perceived or treated. Like the first Venezuelan to play in Europe, didn't happen until 1991 with Starlin Rivas, who was like one of the most talented Venezuelan players, if not the most talented player of all time. He had a place in France's top 10. I can't remember the name of the magazine now. May just be called France Football, the big French football publication that used to make their lists. He was put in like the top 10 talents to watch out for in the late 80s. And yeah, when he got his move to Europe, to Standard Liège in Belgium, he said to me, when people heard that he was Venezuelan, they said, "Oh, why are you here?" And he said, "Football." And they just didn't believe him. All they wanted to speak about were the Miss Universes that came from Venezuela, or about drugs. They didn't want to talk about football. They didn't see Venezuela as a footballing country, and a lot of people still don't now. But Juan Garcia was an incredible talent. By the time 2000 came, so the beginning of our date range, he was already 30 years old. But 2000 marked the year that he got his first golden boot. He got 5 golden boots in his career, the most in Venezuelan football history. But yeah, didn't get his first till 30. And even though he won 4 league titles, the league titles and the top goal scorer seasons only overlapped once, which to me, that's fascinating. And that happened in 2002, a 34 goal season. And his nickname was Lagarto, which basically means lizard or alligator. There's an expression, one of the nicknames in South American football, you get an alligator striker, the kind of striker that's quiet for a long time and then out of nowhere, bam.
Snap, yeah.
Okay. He was very much like that.
Oh, cool.
Nice.
Well, in Filippo Inzaghi just came to mind for some reason there when you said that.
Yeah. We have Fox in the Box, which could be similar, but there was I was speaking to a few journalists for this, and there was just a very set way of describing a player like this. They had to meet certain criteria, and they say that there's not many like it anymore. They actually said Christian Vieri as an example of an alligator striker. But yeah, it was something that maybe cost him on the when it came to the national team. He still got over, I think it was just over 50 caps in the national team, but none of them came when he was at his prime. When Richard Paes became manager in 2001, that basically spelled the end of Garcia's international career, even though that's when he was finishing the top scorer in Venezuela every season. And back then you didn't have Venezuelans scoring hatfuls of goals in Europe. 2001 to 2007, when Paes was national team manager, is when that attitude towards Venezuelan players in Europe began to change. So if you're looking for the best Venezuelan scorer, like Garcia was the answer, but Richard Paes liked every one of his players other than the back four to be experts on the ball and happy in possession. And Garcia wasn't that kind of player. I'm not saying that he didn't have the technical ability to play that kind of game, but he was very much a number 9, whereas Paes wanted a false 9 to spearhead his attack.
So you don't fit the criteria to lead this side, Jordan, unfortunately. No. So, mate, I might be putting you on the spot here, but who's the gaffer?
So I did have a gaffer in mind.
Okay.
Originally, before the post 2000 rule, I was going to be one of the Colombia managers, either Uribe or the other one's name escapes me now. But when you brought in the time limit, I did go with Richard Paes, the Venezuela manager from 2001 to 2007, just because he really did change the football scene in South America by turning Venezuela around. He's also the only Venezuelan manager to win a title outside of Venezuela. He's managed in a few other South American countries, and his football philosophy, he's never managed in Europe, but his football philosophy was honed in Europe. He spent time at AC Milan learning off of Fabio Capello and Arrigo Sacchi, and he completely changed the mindset of how the Venezuelan national team played its football. I have a soft spot for Venezuelan football as well, so he gets the nod.
There's allowed to be a little bias. I think you've done pretty well in that team. There's only a couple of players, so you've done.
Yeah.
We'll let you have the nod of the manager as well.
Yeah, A+ for that homework, I'd say. You mentioned Saki there, Jordan. I don't know if you've read Zonal Marking by Michael Cox. You've read that book?
Yes.
It's very interesting. Saki comes up a lot in terms of like how much inspiration other coaches took from Arrigo Sacchi. Is fascinating, actually, that chapter on Italian football.
He's very much like I think obviously to anyone that knows football like well, they know, especially tactics, like they know who he is. But I do, like, he's probably an unsung hero of like modern football. A lot of people I don't think know quite how big his influence is on a lot of aspects of the modern game.
Yeah. So just to finish up, Jordan, obviously you've got your new book out, and we're going to give away one to one of our listeners. If you could just give us a little overview of that book, where it came from, and how it was sort of the process of how it was created.
It's called Red Wine Arepas: How Football's Becoming Venezuela's Religion. I've always had an interest in Venezuela. In my adult life anyway. It started in around 2012 when I met my now wife. One of her best friends growing up throughout secondary school is a Venezuelan girl, and my wife very much took a lot of influences from her, like food and music. The music my wife was playing in the house was always like reggaeton or bachata, or like music popular in Venezuela. Like a lot of the food that she cooks was like Latin American, and there was Venezuelan influences there. And I like to read a lot. And my dad, my dad's side of the family, all Spanish. And suddenly, like, I'm with this girl who's completely English but speaks better Spanish than me, has more like Spanish influences. And I was like, hold on, what is this? Like, I need to catch up. So I just became obsessed with like reading about different like South American countries in a way to like rediscover my roots. My parents divorced when I was quite young, and I lost all contact with the Spanish side of my family. And like South American football was very much a way of me learning about like Spain and the Spanish language. I'd like play Pro Evo and FIFA with the language settings on Spanish for the commentary, just mainly to escape Pro Evo's ridiculous repetitive commentary. But like things like that. And then in 2017 with that World Cup, Venezuela's under-20s, I just became fascinated with the simple concept that they had. Like Rafael Dudamel, their manager of the under-20s, was also manager of the senior team, and I just thought that was such a simple thing, but like really productive to help the national team grow, and it did. And another thing that fascinated me is they brought in 2007 a rule called the juvenile rule, which basically stipulates every team has to have at least one player under the age of 20 in the starting lineup. And if that player gets substituted, it has to be for another under 20. Okay. And like these very measurable impacts on the game to improve it, just like made me took note. And the thing that really inspired me to write the book is in England, the way Venezuela's seen is very one-dimensional. People only really know about Venezuela through politics, or maybe knowing that it has the biggest oil reserves. And so much is like lost behind that. And that, like, the one way I've come to compare it is, for me, like as an English person, anytime I've been on holiday since like 2015, the only thing people want to talk to you about is Brexit. Like for Venezuelans, for 20 years, the only thing people want to talk to Venezuelans about is Hugo Chavez or Nicolas Maduro. Like that's all they've had. And so much is lost behind that. And I think football's such like a strong anthropological tool to learn about countries and society, that the book really is about Venezuela and its football, rather than solely Venezuelan football. And it was really about like using that sport to access and educate people about Venezuela. And it just became like an obsession.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jordan. That's been fascinating. We learned tons of stuff.
Yeah,
so, yeah,
you
did a great job. Thanks so much for doing that, putting the time and effort into it, because it wasn't easy, that's for sure.
No, thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Well, all the very best in the coming days, and yeah, we wish you well.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
And you. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed that chat as much as we did. For all the latest in terms of guest announcements and pod releases, check out our usual social channels on Twitter, Facebook and YouTube at HTO Football. Also keep an eye out for our latest competitions, and best of luck.